Welcome to today's American Community Media Weekly National News Briefing. I'm Sunita Sarabji, Health Editor at American Community Media and co-producer of our weekly news briefings with my colleague Pilar Marrero. I think it's safe to say that we watched with more than a bit of concern earlier this week as our president declared hepatitis B a sexually transmitted disease, and that the vaccine, which has protected millions of people around the globe, should be given at 12 instead of birth. His remarks came amid a glut of confusing new recommendations from the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, which met September 18th and 19th to discuss recommendations for vaccines, including the MMR vaccine for measles, mumps, rubella, and varicella, and the hepatitis B vaccine. The committee also offered recommendations on the COVID-19 vaccine. Several states have decided that they will create their own advisory panels to determine best practices for vaccines. So, to take us through all this, we have a team of experts who will unpack ACIP's recommendations. Please welcome Dr. Mauricio Bonacini, the CEO of Mission Gastroenterology and Hepatology, and associate clinical professor at the University of California, San Francisco. Dr. Peter Chin Hong, infectious diseases specialist and professor of medicine, also at UCSF. Dr. Yvonne Bonnie Maldonado, professor of pediatrics and of health research and policy at Stanford University, with a focus on infectious diseases. Dr. Maldonado was one of the 17 ACIP committee members who were all fired in June by Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy, and Dr. Benjamin Newman, professor of biology at Texas A&M University. We asked reporters to enter their questions in the chat, and we will address as many as we can immediately after each speaker presents. So we begin with Dr. Mauricio Bonacini, who discusses ACIP's recommendations for the Hep B vaccine. Dr. Bonacini joins us from Greece today. He was featured in an excellent investigative series on Hep B, reported by our colleagues at the San Francisco Public Press. I will drop that link into the chat. It is available for reprint, and we have translated it into simplified and traditional Chinese, Vietnamese, and Korean. Welcome, Dr. Bonacini.
Good evening, everybody. I'm sorry, good evening for me, maybe good afternoon, most of you. I see a lot of names. I think maybe you're joining from a little bit all over the globe. So anyway, I was asked to just talk about 5 minutes about my perspective on hepatitis B and its prevention by vaccination. So, and I know we have Peter is a great expert in infectious diseases, so please feel free to correct me. But basically, the hepatitis B virus is a small DNA virus that infects essentially basically only the liver. There, it may be dormant or inactive for a long time, but it can also provoke hepatitis, and from there, liver cirrhosis, which would be essentially a scar, a condition of the liver. Then it's in its most developed stage is called cirrhosis and may end up needing a liver transplantation. The virus, though, it's also basically an oncogenic virus in that it can create liver cancer even before the stage of cirrhosis, and that's why it's an important virus. The other very important thing to know about this virus is that it's surface antigen, so it's a surface protein which is the hallmark of infection. Basically, the surface antigen is present in every patient that has chronic hepatitis B. It's also very immunogenic. That means it induces very strong, durable, and efficient immunity in preventing further disease. And actually, recently, a few years ago, there was even a better vaccine that's been developed for those that typically don't respond that well to the vaccine, such as HIV patients or hemodialysis patients. But the issue is that in children, particularly in babies, the protection is very strong, is early, and is obtained in 95+% of patients. I was just reviewing a recent paper from China showing that only after two shots when the baby is born, so it was called the birth dose vaccine, and the second one 1 month, I believe, after 2 shots, 97% had significantly detectable titers. So it's a very good vaccine. So that's the first premise. And also, we know that in patients that over time, like for instance, I was vaccinated in 1984 when I stuck myself with a patient actually with HIV, and I was tested for hepatitis B. I was negative. I got the vaccination. I had incredibly high titers, and I kept them for at least 20 years. Now I don't know what my titers are, but it doesn't matter because we know that patients that have been immunized, even though the surface antibody decreases below the magic number of 10, they will not get clinical disease. So they may be infected with hepatitis B virus, but will not develop icteric hepatitis or, God forbid, fulminant hepatitis. So it's an excellent vaccine. That's the premise. The second premise is this. How do you get hepatitis B? Well, we know worldwide by far the most common mode of transmission is mother to child transmission. So a mother is very highly viremic. Typically, she doesn't know it, and then she'll transmit to the baby. The problem with this is that a baby that doesn't have any protection at birth, if gets hepatitis B, essentially will keep the hepatitis B for life, about 90%. That's the estimate. Whereas if you give a birth dose vaccine plus or minus the immunoglobulin, you can decrease that to the single digit number. So it makes a big difference. And there are other interventions like antiviral therapy, which are not discussed. So now what do we know about what happens if you vaccinate babies at birth and then you give them the 3 doses of vaccine to finish in the first few months of life? What happens is that you very much decrease the chance of liver cancer. That's been shown early on in Taiwan. So Taiwan basically was the first country to show that hepatitis B, liver cancer was preventable by vaccine, which is a very, very important data set for the whole world, essentially. And then multiple countries have followed that recommendation. I'm here on vacation with doctors from Portugal. And in Portugal also, like in the United States, the recommendation is to administer the birth dose vaccine, even though the Portuguese population is not particularly high risk. But here's the thing that President Trump got wrong. I looked at recently the data, I think published 2 or 3 years ago from the CDC. And they estimate that 1,000 babies in the USA. So let's not forget about Taiwan. Let's see what happens in our own backyard. 1,000 babies infected with hepatitis B per year, we can estimate that 900 will become chronic. The CDC shows data, and I'm reading here, 2,200 acute hepatitis B infections. But as you know, since it's supposed to be reported, but it's not reported, the estimated, in quotes, is 13,000. But remember, an adult that gets 13, out of the 13,000 adults that contract hepatitis B, in adults, only maybe 5%, in my opinion, actually maximum 5% will become chronic. So if I do the math, and now it's gone, so 5% of 13,000 will be 650, if I'm correct, right? Yes, I'm correct. Well, I think I'm correct. Anyway, so 650 is still below 900. So the position of President Trump to say that sexual transmission is the most important is just wrong, because more mother-to-child transmission occurs in the United States. Plus, remember, these estimated cases are sexual, but also injection drug use, potentially contaminated medical or non-medical things like tattoos or piercing and so on and so forth. So data from the United States suggests that sexual transmission is not the most important mode of transmission. So then saying that we can delay it until age 12, so before people get sexually active, I think is not supported by data, essentially. And then just one word before we get any question. The question is then what does hepatitis B vaccination at birth accomplish in the United States? I'm going to refer you to a paper that was published 2 years ago by a friend of mine, Dr. of course, now I'm blocking on the name, from Alaska, Dr. Brian McMahon, together with Philippa Easterbrook. She's a big leader at the WHO. They wrote a paper analyzing the data. And basically in the US, in Alaska, liver cancer, they had 0 liver cancer cases in young adults after 1993, the date of implementation of birth dose vaccine. And in the United States, the estimation is that there's been a decrease in hepatitis B acute infection by 60% because people get vaccinated before they get sexually active. So I'll stop here. I think there's good reason enough to keep the vaccination recommendation as birth dose vaccine as it is.
And Dr. Bonacini, could you discuss the prevalence of hepatitis B in East Asian communities?
Well, that's a very interesting topic. So, in China, for instance, so not Taiwan, but mainland China, where also they introduce vaccination, basically universal vaccination. The percentage of the general population that carry the hepatitis B virus, so being hepatitis B surface antigen positive, went from 8 to 10% as an estimate down to 4 to 5% now. I'm still flabbergasted to see that some ethnic groups, like for instance the Indian, so East Indian subcontinent immigrants, they have an estimated 3 to 4% hepatitis B carriage rate. Compared in Caucasian population in the US, it's less than 0.5%. So we're talking about tenfold higher. Yet we don't hear much about it. There is virtually no awareness. And so locally, and for Peter and I'm sorry, Dr. Maldonado with Stanford, I'm a little bit on a crusade in the Bay Area to engage communities like the Afghan community in the East Bay and Sacramento and the Indian community to raise awareness about being tested. In fact, the CDC recommends triple testing, hepatitis B surface antigen, core antibody, and surface antibody in all adults 18 to 59. And there is good reason behind that. So it's very variable. In the Philippines, for instance, not many people know, the estimation of hepatitis B surface antigen is nearly 10%, which frankly I wasn't aware until a year ago. So it's an issue. There's little awareness. And I just came back from this meeting in Accra, Ghana, where people don't get tested because they don't have money. Well, in the United States, we don't get tested because we ignore the problem. So I think it's a worldwide issue. And the WHO goal of viral hepatitis elimination by 2030, unfortunately, is not going to be achievable, neither here in the United States, a resource-rich country, or in developing countries as well.
That's too bad. Henrietta Burrows has a question for you. Henrietta, please ask your question.
Thanks so much, Sunita. Usually there are side effects with all kinds of vaccinations. So are there any negative side effects or dangers in vaccinating babies with this hepatitis B vaccine?
I think that's the best question for Dr. Maldonado because she's a pediatrician. I don't know. I'm pretty sure that many have been reported. I remember I had a little bit of pain like any flu vaccine. I don't remember of any major events. As you know, people that don't believe in vaccination will sort of, should I say, up trump those adverse events. So maybe I'm not the best person to ask. I like to say something, though, that many people have an issue with babies get stuck with the needle. There's a new vaccine in development, which is amazing because it'll give a little bit of the surface antigen protein, which, as I said, is very immunogenic, via little tiny micro needles, sort of like, one of these plants, maybe poison ivy or something like that. They will put on the skin. It would not be as invasive and better tolerated. But I think I'll defer to Dr. Maldonado to answer that question. In children.
Pamela Anchung of Immigrant Magazine has a question. Pamela, please ask your question. I'm sorry.
Thank you so much, Sunita. So, Doctor, given that several states are rejecting the latest guidance that's been provided, how can healthcare providers especially those serving immigrant communities who often left behind? How can they serve them in a way that the information is not so conflicting and confusing that, they fall into cracks? It's a big, big issue in our immigrant communities, especially we have undocumented, we have people that don't have the best quality of care.
That's an excellent question. All I can do, what I'm doing, my little corner of the world, is I'm volunteering in churches, temples. Last, I was volunteering in a Hindu temple in Livermore, California, to again make people aware that this disease exists. And I realized that we're all humans, and liver disease is not the highest killer. There's competing things, but I'm trying to give grand rounds in local hospital to raise awareness to the CDC recommendation about basically ascertaining cases if they are there. In fact, regardless of the ethnic background, the level of risk, I think everybody should know their surface antigen status. So that's sort of my simple message. And the issues that try to go through communities, and as you know, different communities will have, how should I say, a best addressed with members of its own community, because the credibility rate will be much better.
Yeah, Bao Zhao and Vidya Setaraman have basically the same question. What is the likelihood that someone, if infected with hepatitis B, will develop liver cancer? And what evidence do we have that vaccinating children at birth reduces liver cancer later in life?
So we have plenty of evidence. As I said, the country that first showed that hepatitis liver cancer rates were decreasing was Taiwan. But I will just show you the multiple examples. I cannot tell you that I know the literature in every corner of the world, but data from Alaska and Alaska Natives also showed that after birth vaccination against hepatitis B, there was no reported case of hepatocellular carcinoma in young adults. So that would be my answer.
Thank you for joining us, Dr. Bonatini. We very much welcome your remarks and enjoy your vacation in Greece. We move on to Dr.
My pleasure.
Yes. We move on to Dr. Ivan Maldonado, who discusses ACIP's recommendations for the measles, mumps, rubella, and varicella vaccines. Welcome, Dr. Maldonado.
Well, thank you so much for allowing me to speak today. Because of the interest of in the interest of time, I have written my comments, but again, these are all my words, just so you know. So I'm Bonnie Maldonado. I'm a pediatric infectious disease physician at Stanford University and a former voting member of the CDC's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, also known as the ACIP. My research is focused on vaccine epidemiology and development, and I led the COVID-19 response at my institution and for the American Academy of Pediatrics. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak about a vaccine that has quietly protected millions of children for nearly 2 decades, the measles, mumps, rubella, and varicella vaccine, or MMRV. When we talk about vaccines, we often focus on the newest developments, but sometimes it's just as important to remember the tools we already have. Safe, effective, and time-tested tools like MMRV that prevent serious childhood diseases. To be clear, we have had two separate vaccines, MMR and varicella, for even longer. MMR vaccine was licensed by the FDA in 1971 and the varicella vaccine in 1995. We have decades of experience with these vaccines. They are recommended for children to be given as 2 doses, the first at 12 to 15 months of age and the second at 4 to 6 years of age. Let's begin with what this vaccine protects against. Measles is one of the most contagious viruses known to medicine. Before vaccines, measles caused about 500 deaths and 48,000 hospitalizations every year in the US. It can also cause encephalitis and permanent disability. Complications include ear infections in 1 in 10, pneumonia in 1 in 20, brain swelling or encephalitis in 1 in 1,000, and deaths in 1 in 3,000 cases, especially in infants and very young children. Mumps is often dismissed as just swelling of the cheeks, but in reality, it can cause meningitis, deafness, and infertility. And by the way, I've seen all of these diseases that we're talking about today in my practice over time. We've seen how quickly it spreads in schools and college campuses. And rubella is a mild illness for most children and adults, but devastating during pregnancy. Rubella is a really invasive virus that can cause miscarriage, stillbirth, and congenital rubella syndrome, which leads to heart defects, blindness, and deafness. Before the availability of the rubella vaccine, there were large outbreaks of rubella among pregnant women, leading to tens of thousands of cases of congenital rubella syndrome. The last outbreak, which occurred in the 1960s, resulted in tens of thousands of miscarriages and over 20,000 children born with congenital rubella syndrome in the United States. And finally, varicella or chickenpox. This is another disease that people often underestimate. It can cause pneumonia, bacterial infections, and in rare cases, death. Survivors can develop shingles later in life, a painful and sometimes disabling condition. Each of these diseases alone is dangerous. Together, they represent a major threat to child health, and that's why a combination vaccine like MMRV is so valuable. The science behind MMRV is robust. Clinical trials and decades of real-world data show greater than 90% protection after 2 doses for each of these 4 diseases. Protection is long-lasting and often lifelong. And importantly, the immune response with the combined vaccine is just as strong as giving the 4 vaccines separately. So why a combination? Because it's easier for families and providers. A single shot covers 4 diseases. That means fewer injections, less stress for children, and more efficient clinic visits. In fact, many parents prefer the combination for exactly that reason. And combination vaccines have helped keep overall vaccine coverage in the United States among the highest in the world. Now let's talk about safety, because that's the question every parent rightly asks. The MMR vaccine is extremely safe. Like all vaccines, it can cause mild reactions, soreness at the injection site, a mild rash, or a temporary fever. The main safety issue we watch closely is febrile seizures. After the first dose, children who receive MMRV have a slightly higher risk of febrile seizures compared to children who get the MMR and varicella vaccines separately, meaning 1 in each arm. The numbers matter here. About 8 per 10,000 children experience a febrile seizure with MMRV, compared to about 4 per 10,000 with separate shots. That's an additional risk of 0.04%. And importantly, febrile seizures occur with normal childhood fevers due to normal viral infections as well as vaccines. So these are not just limited to getting MMRV. And febrile seizures are brief, resolve on their own, and do not cause long-term harm. I have treated many children with febrile seizures over my career. By the second dose, that difference disappears. After nearly 20 years of monitoring, we have seen no serious long-term risks associated with MMRV. The benefits far outweigh the risks. Today, about 15% of US families choose MMRV for the first dose, while over 95% use it for the second dose. That pattern reflects a thoughtful balance. Some providers and parents prefer separate shots at the first visit to minimize even the tiny added seizure risk, while others prefer fewer injections. Either way, both options provide strong, lasting protection. And the result? We've prevented millions of cases of measles, mumps, rubella, and varicella since the vaccine introduction. So, the bigger picture, the MMR vaccine is more than just a convenience. It is part of a broader public health effort to protect children, families, and communities. Outbreaks remind us of what's at stake. Just last year, measles outbreaks in the United States hospitalized dozens of children, most of them unvaccinated. Each case represents a child who might have been protected. Combination vaccines like MMRV make it easier to maintain high coverage, and high coverage is what keeps communities safe. The spread of misinformation about the measles vaccine has been a key factor, leading more parents to forego vaccination for their children. This year's measles outbreak in the southwestern United States and declining vaccination rates has led to the highest number of measles cases in the United States since 1992. In closing, I want to return to where I began. Vaccines are one of the greatest achievements of modern medicine. In the last 30 years or so, vaccines have been estimated to prevent over 1 million deaths in children in the United States, and tens of millions of hospitalizations. The MMR vaccine embodies that achievement. 4 diseases, 1 safe and effective shot, and millions of children protected. It's easy to forget the fear of measles outbreaks, the tragedy of congenital rubella, or the pain of shingles in later life because most people don't think these diseases exist anymore. But they do exist. We are just protected by vaccines. The MMRV vaccine ensures that for most families in the US, those remain stories of the past, not the present. As providers, policymakers, and parents, our job is to keep it that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Maldonado. There are a number of questions for you, but I have one of my own. Could you reassure us about febrile seizures? What do they look like, and what should parents be aware of? Are they fatal?
So, as I just said, there are a number of conditions that can cause seizures in babies, as they are in adults and older children. Febrile seizures in babies are very common. Actually, about 2% of children may have febrile seizures just from having a high fever from a viral infection or from an ear infection. These are very common, unfortunately, and they are very frightening. I've seen them, parents bring their children in for these over the years. So vaccines are not the only thing that causes them. It has to do with the fact that rapidly rising fevers in babies can elicit a very rapid response by having a small seizure, and this actually changes over time. As the baby gets older than 2 years of age, those febrile seizures just go away. But children just have a lower threshold for having a seizure with a high fever, and so we've been studying these for decades because we know they occur in all cases with vaccines or without. And they don't have long-term side effects. Now, the problem is that there are some underlying conditions in children that we become aware of in the first few years of life. And those are actually underlying neurologic problems, actual brain structure problems that can be unmasked with a febrile seizure. But those are very different from normal febrile seizures that occur after a high fever of any kind, whether it's a vaccine or not.
Thank you. That is reassuring. Christopher Young of the Mississippi Link has a good question for you as a former member of ACIP. Christopher, please ask your question.
Yes, Doctor. Under the current national leadership, seems to be ample evidence that the health administration relating to the health posture in the United States will suffer or already is potentially suffering. What is your best estimate of the damage that will be done by these policies, and can they rapidly rebound in the event of new leadership? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. I can only speak to the issue of vaccines, and fortuitously, some of our Stanford and Baylor colleagues and I wrote a paper in April modeling what could happen with current and future vaccine coverage over the next 25 years for 4 diseases: measles, rubella, polio, and diphtheria. Right now, as we know, we have very low to no cases, or we did, of those diseases. But we modeled what would happen with the current vaccination coverage, which is at about a little bit over 92% in the US overall, although they vary by region. And we modeled what would happen to these diseases in the US over the next 25 years. And what we found is really sad and surprising. Well, maybe not surprising, but very sad. We found that even at current vaccination levels, we're going to start to see millions of cases of these diseases and their complications. But with a increase of just 5% vaccine coverage in the US, we would see a massive reduction in these diseases in the next 25 years or so. Now we think, oh, well, that's 25 years away, but why would we want to set ourselves up for failure? Right now, we have officially eliminated measles in the US since the year 2000. It took a lot of work to get there. And we know that that if we even that measles would return based on our modeling, and this paper was published in JAMA, by the way, so it's a pretty reputable journal, in April of this year, that measles would return to being a normal circulating virus in the United States within 5 years, and polio within 10 years. So we're talking about within our children's lifetime and our lifetime. So it is a significant impact, and we are concerned about keeping these diseases away. And I think part of the issue is people don't remember these diseases. They never saw them. There's a lot of physicians even who never saw these diseases, but they're still out there. We're just immune right now.
Elise Maricoux from Bay City News has a question that I think is on a lot of people's minds. Elise, could you please ask your question? I can ask it for her in the interest of time. Could you please talk about why some people link the MMR vaccine to causing autism, and if that has been debunked?
Oh, do we have 5 hours? So I'll just keep it very brief. There is absolutely no credible study, and I say credible, that links measles or any other vaccines to autism. These studies have been done in millions, literally millions of children all around the world, including the US, and we have not found a link. Anti-vax has always been around since, Benjamin Franklin was an anti-vaxxer, and he regretted it because smallpox killed his son. And he wrote that he regretted not believing. It's easy to be afraid. We know that. That is why we need to bring light to these subjects. But these vaccines have been shown to be safe and effective, but there are people out there, unfortunately, who benefit. They actually get benefit from selling their own supplements and their own snake oils instead of, quote unquote, these dangerous vaccines. So there's a lot to unpack there, but basically measles is not associated with autism. Vaccine is not. And there are just many other social factors going on there as well.
Thank you, Dr. Maldonado. There are additional questions for you in the chat, and if you could please answer them there, that would be terrific. We next move on to Dr. Peter Chin Hong, who will discuss ACIP's recommendations for the COVID-19 vaccines. Welcome, Dr. Chin Hong.
Thanks for having me on, Sunita. Hi, everyone, Sandy and Bonnie. It's great to not only see you, but hear you. And Ben, look forward to hearing what you have to say. So this has been a really roller coaster time for COVID vaccines, something that we never thought we would get into in terms of this moment, because not only are people recommendations changing very variable by state, depending on enforcement, but I think we're losing sight of who should be protected with COVID and kind of making it very average from the latest CDC Advisory Board or ACIP meetings. But to me, there are really four main groups that continue to be the people that I lose sleep about, the people I still see in the hospital, and still not only hospitalized, but also do very poorly with COVID. Even though COVID has become two diseases now, there are most people for whom it's not something that will cause them to go to the hospital, may cause you to be very uncomfortable. And there's a lot of stories I've heard recently about that. But there's some people who it's like it's 2020 and they are not doing well. And those are the people I still see in the hospital. So the four groups are, and I'll come back to that at the end, people who are 65 and older, regardless of health conditions. The reason why that group is important because they still drive hospitalizations, they still drive deaths. So we still had about 50,000 deaths from COVID in 2024, and that was supposed to be a COVID recovery year. So it's very similar or even higher than an average flu year. And a typical patient I see is somebody who's, say, 75, who might have gotten a lot of vaccines in the beginning, but they didn't get a lot of reminders to the immune system or boosters in the last year or two. The second group is, of course, pregnant people, whether or not you have health conditions or not. And the reason why that group is important is because not only for the pregnant person themselves, they are relatively immune compromised because the immune system kind of gets a little bit less reactive because of the presence of the baby. And we know that pregnant people are a little bit relatively immune compromised. So historically in COVID, we've seen lots of bad outcomes in pregnant women. And the reason why that's an interesting group is that before they were pregnant, they didn't have to worry about that. So they might have been a 25 or 30-year-old with no health problems, but all of a sudden they may become more at risk than your average person. And of course, the second reason for thinking about pregnant people is the idea that they are carrying a fetus. And we rely on the antibodies from the mom or the pregnant person to go across the placenta to protect the unborn baby. We can't vaccinate under 6 months. And like with measles, it is really important to not only protect the mom, but to protect the baby. So that's population number 2. Population number 3 is kids, and Bonnie can talk a lot about this, kids who are younger and just like in influenza. I think we've lost sight of the fact because there's been so much morbidity and deaths in older people that the very young is also at risk. In fact, what we know is that the hospitalization rate for babies under 2 with COVID is very similar to those who are older with COVID. And in fact, in the last 2 seasons, currently last winter, the emergency department room visit rate for kids under 2 with COVID is higher even than that of those who are 65 and older. So it makes sense. And you don't know, and in that population, 30-40% of them had no comorbidities. So you can't use comorbidities as a guide for the very young, just like in flu. And then the fourth population is people of any age with any comorbidity, particularly those who are very immune compromised. And that's because their immune system in all of these cases are very old, very immune compromised. For example, the body may forget what COVID looks like, even though they might have seen it last year. And you need to remind them more and more for what it looks like. And that's why you need to get that booster. So those are the 4 populations. So why are we confused? We're confused because we went from a place of recommending vaccines. We think it's really important for this populist person, that person to get it, to a place where saying COVID vaccines is not illegal and it's allowed. So I think that is a very different messaging. And what I want to all coalesce around is the idea that there are still people at very high risk of COVID, and they need to be reminded every year. The immune system needs to be reminded every year. And we have to move from a place of saying that COVID vaccines are not prohibited to one where we actually do recommend it very, very strongly for some people. Specifically, I think another lot of questions are, what did the FDA say? How did the CDC guidance change? And it kind of gives you a sense of what the national conversation is looking like at the political leader level. So the FDA said, we prioritize 65 and older. We think people under 65 can get it if they have comorbidities. And we think kids under 18 should talk to their healthcare provider in a process called informed decision making. The CDC advisory board said, okay, we are going to make it simple. Maybe they had pressure, maybe not. But we're going to say everybody, even if you're over 65, needs to have this thing called informed clinical decision making, which many of us think is doing a big disservice because it provides a big barrier between you going to Walgreens or CVS and getting the vaccine and having to talk to a healthcare provider. Remember, about 30 or 40% of Americans don't have easy access to a healthcare provider, and 75% of Americans got their vaccine from a local drugstore rather than going to a healthcare provider's office in the last year or 2. So that's why it's hard. It's hard because of access to all the populations we care about in this room. It's hard because of variability. So even though there's a lot of confusion because the way it was stated, it's very vague. Like, what's informed decision making? Is the pharmacist going to enforce that? I think they'll probably enforce it in some states, just like some states have required prescriptions for COVID vaccines until now, until the CDC ratifies that decision, the head of the CDC or director. So variability and access are the two things that I'm worried about. On the other side, we have the forces of positivity, which is the Western States Health Alliance, which is California, Oregon, and Washington, and joined by Hawaii, which said, we're going to use science, people like Bonnie, to really weigh in on guidance. Essentially, what they're doing is kind of going back in time to when all of these recommendations were science-based and people like Bonnie were on the advisory board. They were vetted over a very long period, and Bonnie can talk about that, rather than one that seems to be less science-based currently. The 8 East Coast states have also done that, and there are scattered states around the country, for example, Illinois, Missouri, who are doing that as well. But what that serves to do, although good, is also increase the number of voices. And then, I think it's hard to have a public health sort of community message when you have so many different voices. But until then, I think, at least in some states, that will be something that could mitigate what's coming out from other areas like the CDC. The second thing is, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who recommends what. Are you going to get it covered? And so far, at least from the Insurance Association of America and those that cover insurances, it seems that insurance companies will continue to cover vaccines, although that might again be variable for those who have insurance. And that's because it is very cost effective to give somebody a vaccine than have a bad outcome like hospitalization or death or disability that Bonnie talked about. But again, it's the uncertainty that makes me worried. For in other words, somebody who has a kid at home isn't sure if their insurance is going to cover it. They're not going to really try and go and make that appointment. What about that older person at home who hears that, maybe pharmacists are going to need a prescription for a COVID shot? They're not even going to try to find out what the truth is, because again, truth is so fluid right now. They may just not get it. So I think what we found over time in targeted recommendations, like recommendations is that they introduce barriers and they prevent people who really need the vaccine from getting it because they get average with everyone else. And that's why in the old days, flu used to be targeted. It used to be the very young, the very old. And then what people realized is that the very young and the very old weren't getting it because there was variability in how they were getting that message. And when they made it simplified, the people who you cared about the most got it. So I'd end with that, and also end with the fact that, I think, we are a global outlier right now in the United States around immunization. And for many, many years, we were the leader of science-based prevention. And a lot of countries kind of coalesced around us. We gave a lot of support to WHO and other vaccines, and now we're definitely an outlier. And I worry that again that's going to divide countries' responses as well.
Thank you, Dr. Tin Hung. You've got a number of questions for you. Let's start out with Elena Kuzitnova from Slavic Sat.
Thank you.
There you go.
I have two questions. So the first one is about the myth. Can you tell if there are new myths about vaccines and vaccinations which are circulating, and do they keep affecting the vaccination rate? And another question about COVID. It's kind of personal. I recently got vaccinated, and soon after, I received an email from my healthcare provider telling that they got a new COVID vaccine. So the question is, are older COVID vaccines still effective, or should I get a new COVID vaccine shot? Thank you.
Well, those are great questions, Elena. First of all, I'll answer the easy one first, which is that the current vaccine for COVID is based on it's all Omicron, it's all relatives of JN1, but you hear names like LP.8.1, etc. They're very similar to last year's vaccine. So if you already got last year's vaccine, like during the summer, I think you're generally going to be fine and you don't need to get another one. So that's the short answer. Uh, uh, and if you also recently got COVID, you can wait 3 months before you got it. So that's that answer. The other question about side effects of COVID and myths, there are many myths that we heard in 2020. They're coming back again. Things like the mRNA vaccines will change your genetics and your DNA. The mRNA vaccine doesn't even stick around. It like destructs itself after it provides a message to the body, so it never gets incorporated into your body. We've heard things like, again, the whole idea that it causes side effects like inflammation of the heart, etc. Just remember the overall message is that you can have a higher chance of getting those things with COVID than with the vaccine. That's true for many of those kinds of side effects that have been listed. And I think so those are just some that are circulating still. Luckily, we haven't heard things like it has a chip and people are following you around and things like that, but those things are still being circulated.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elena. Araceli Martinez from La Opinión has the next question. Araceli?
Hello.
Yes,
Hello,
please ask your question. Briefly.
Two questions. How will the COVID vaccine rollout work for people without health insurance in California? I mean, for example, for undocumented immigrants, those that don't have health insurance. And regarding the COVID vaccine among Latinos, there are a lot of comments that this vaccine can cause adverse effects, a lot of stuff. And people say that they would rather not get vaccinated. And then when you listen all of this, you don't know what to do. How safe is the current COVID-19 vaccine? Thank you.
Thank you, Araceli. Those are very important questions and one that our minority populations are asking. Again, remember they used to ask us, all our populations, all our rich populations in California asked the same questions in 2020, 21, and we worked very hard with community leaders to give the messaging, and our rates became very similar to the general population. And I think what has happened in the last year or two is that the population that's getting a lot of people are hesitant again, and you can't blame them because of the narrative from our leaders. I think that first of all, they're very safe, and again, with most people, they probably, outside those four groups that I talked about, particularly those who are the very young and the very old, they probably will be fine without getting the vaccine. So I think pearl number one is probably choose your battles. If it's somebody who's 75, maybe spend a little bit more time kind of saying, well, some people may not have a hard time with COVID, but some people will, and I'm really worried about you. The second thing is, even if somebody refuses to get vaccinated, I think our messaging around antivirals still needs to be continued, meaning that there's a cop-out. If you get diagnosed and get a test in the first 5 days, you can get something like Paxlovid or Remdesivir still that can keep you from getting really sick if you're really vulnerable or older. But no great answer, except that I'm worried that, minority populations, vulnerable populations are falling behind and the divide is getting bigger because there's a lot of misinformation out there.
Dr. Chin Hung, thank you so much. Could you please answer Henrietta Burrow's question about long COVID in children in the chat? In the interest of time, we're moving on. Our last speaker today is Dr. Ben Newman, who will address ACIP's decision-making process and points the panel made to support their anti-vaccine decisions. Welcome, Dr. Newman.
Hi. Yeah. Unlike Dr. Maldonado, I have never been on the ACIP panel, so this is a molecular virologist's perspective on what's going on. We'll start with Secretary Kennedy's decision. So the things that he's doing, I think, are very typical for what you might expect from a lawyer. Scientists and medics, we're in the reality business. We have to do what works and we have to see what exists. When you're a lawyer, the facts don't necessarily matter as much as what you can convince a jury or a judge. And I think that's a lot of what's going on here. There's myth making, there's spinning of wonderful stories or terrible stories. And honestly, yeah, a lot of people are going to get hurt because of it. I'm not saying that a person can't grow. I'm just saying that for a lawyer to turn into a top-notch master of a science administration, they would have to grow quite a lot. Yeah. All right. Part of that decision, or a thing that came just before the ACIP decision, was the Department of Health and Human Services pulling about $500 million that had been awarded for mRNA vaccine research. The problem there is that some of that was going toward diseases that can probably only be stopped by RNA vaccines. One of those is HIV. We've tried a lot of ways to vaccinate against HIV. And the problem is that the target, which is the protein that sticks out on the outside of the virus, it's called the envelope protein. It's like the spike of a coronavirus. That changes shape. And the only shape that gives you the best protection is the very first shape that it makes when it's completely closed. Within minutes, and certainly within hours, that shape changes. It opens, it starts to unfold, and all of the original parts that the immune system would have been able to recognize are essentially masked, hidden, scrambled, lost. Because of that, there is no way to actually grow enough of a virus, whether you inactivate it or not, or grow enough of a protein to get it in the original, most effective conformation. You have to make it in the cell that's right next to the immune cell that is going to receive it. There is really no other way. It's just the nature of the beast. I think another problem that has come up in some of the communication from Health and Human Services has been that the idea that these new vaccines only seem to protect for a little while, whereas some childhood vaccinations like polio are said to protect for life, even though maybe it's a little less than that in reality. The problem is that COVID is not polio. So in the polio virus, the thing you're vaccinating against is a shell, and the shell is a bunch of little pieces that have to come together and they lock perfectly into each other. The virus changes at the same rate as coronavirus, but it has much less tolerance for change. Most changes to the polio virus just make a dead virus, and then those dead viruses are no longer things you have to worry about. So the virus is kind of a sitting target, and that's why we can make immunity for a long time that does a lot of good. With coronaviruses, that is not the case. We're targeting a highly armored protein that has great swaths of the protein that don't seem to have much of a role in actually causing the infection. They mostly seem to be there because they can deflect a lot of the countermeasures that our immune system would throw up. Now, at the ACIP meeting, there are several slide sets, and you can go and look at these. They are listed on the website, and you can look through them yourself. What you will see is a set of mostly very sensible slide sets, and these are coming from the usual subjects, the people that study these things for a living. And then in each of those meetings, there is one slide set that is absolutely bananas in the opinion of this particular molecular biologist. That's the one that seems to have had the most effect, if we can say that the slides had any effect at all on the voting of the voting members. A lot of the concerns in there come down to purity, which is a weird concept in science, because by the time you have two molecules, purity is already out the window. There is no way to make something completely pure. And they tend to focus on things like small bits of DNA or RNA that potentially are in the vaccines that are made of RNA. This is true, but this is also true of, for example, human insulin that we take and inject into our bodies. This is true of some biologics. Monoclonal antibodies, for example, are farmed the same way that you would farm insulin and, a similar way to how you would produce an mRNA vaccine. And there are little byproducts here. So it's not purity that's really the issue. The issue is that these mRNA vaccines are being held to a very different standard from anything else. And I think when you have people who are willing to accept some, I don't know, kind of not very fact-based things and are willing to hold things to very different standards that probably shouldn't be, those probably aren't recommendations that you should place a lot of faith in. Certainly, I wouldn't. I think that's probably good for now. We can go to the little things at the end if you like.
Yeah, Dr. Newman, I have a couple of questions before we move on to the several questions in the chat. Could you describe an example of one of those banana slides?
There was one that was talking about bits of the plasmid that were in some batches of the mRNA vaccines and were not present because the vaccines were made with what is called a clean PCR product in some of the early tests. That's a thing you can do when you're trying to grow just a little bit, which is what they were doing at the beginning. When you're trying to scale it up, you need plasmid technology, and it's plasmids that are used to produce insulin and monoclonal antibodies and all the good things that come out of cells that we use to keep ourselves healthy.
I got this question. Could you describe the makeup of the ACIP advisory panel that made these recommendations and compare it to the one that Dr. Maldonado served on?
Dr. Maldonado would be far better. She is much more familiar with these people.
Dr. Maldonado, do you want to take that on briefly?
Well, again, I know most of these people, some of them better than others. A couple I don't know at all. First of all, I just say that those of us the 17 of us who were terminated on June 6th of this year took an average of 1 to 2 years to get appointed and vetted for the process. And these new members were appointed in 2 days. Wow. So I'll just let that stand. The other thing is most of them have advanced degrees, but we have virtually with the 1 or 2 exceptions, virtually no clinical experience among the group, certainly no pediatric or frontline physician experience, and certainly no public health experience. The extent of the ignorance of public health structures and process that many of us have been studying and working with for decades is astounding. So I'll just leave it at that.
All right, Ling Hung has a question from Sinovision. Ling, would you ask your question, please? I don't know if Ling is still on, so I will ask it for him. How can media help explain conflicting federal and state vaccine guidelines without creating more fear? That's an excellent question. Dr. Newman?
That may be a better question for anybody else who is here today than me. I can tell you how stuff works, but not why people work. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Fair. Who would like to take that question on from Sinovision?
Peter, you want to take that one?
Can you repeat it? Sorry, I was answering the questions in the chat.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Please go ahead, Dr. Maldonado.
No, I was just talking about how can the media help inspire more confidence in communication?
Yeah, well, I think that one interesting piece of information that I read, it was a recent Kaiser Family Foundation poll, and they surveyed Americans, and first of all, 2 things. The first is that they still trust their clinician, their primary care provider, more than the CDC and more than federal officials. So I think that allegiance is something that media can focus on. Maybe continuing to interview people that are trusted, community leaders, etc. The second thing that I was pleased to see is that the population still believes in vaccines. So more than 90% of Americans believe in vaccines still. And even though it seems not that way to the rest of the world from the narrative and the messaging coming from the top, and then even more than 80% believe in school mandates for vaccines. So I think maybe centering where the public is right now can help with that, and not focusing on the naysayers, but using some of the same things that we've learned over the last few years. But I'm sure Bonnie has other things to recommend as well.
I think those are perfect points. I think one of the things that one of my colleagues said, who's also kicked off another panel for the FDA, he said, these people have been around, anti-vax people have been around for a long time, but now they have a bigger bullhorn. They can speak from the very top, whereas it used to be that they were a smaller minority of people who really didn't represent, they were very loud and vocal. Normal people who aren't worried and who trust their provider and recommendations don't get out there and demonstrate or yell and scream. And so what we're seeing now is just that these individuals have a much broader platform to espouse their false views.
Perfect. Well, we are running out of time, but I'd like to ask each of you to deliver your 30-second soundbite, your most important takeaway from our discussion today. Dr. Maldonado, since we've got you on, why don't you give us your 30-second soundbite first?
Yeah, sure. So I want to thank you all for listening in. I know you represent people from all around the world. I think it's important to think about what has happened to public health, not only in the US, but around the world. I think we are at a pinnacle of human society. We are living longer. We are, despite what we think, living healthier than we ever have in the history of humankind. The life expectancy around the world is better. Extreme poverty had been almost eliminated. So we're doing better. But I think people are very worried about things that they have not seen or not experienced. They don't remember, or they never experienced some of these things that they think are happening to them now. And so I think it's really important we put perspective for people. 100 years ago, 40% of children under the age of 40% of children did not live to the age of 5 in the United States. And that was true for the rest of the world. We are seeing more improvements in life expectancy. Child mortality is dropping. We need to focus on ways to keep that going and, yes, address chronic conditions, but not get rid of things that work.
Thank you, Dr. Maldonado. Let's go next to Dr. Newman.
Hi, yeah. Okay, so go. Shoot, I can't read my own handwriting. Yeah. Oh, there we go.
Excellent.
What I want to say is that I know a lot of the anti-vaccine sentiment right now is coming from parents, from people who are worried, are we doing the right thing for our kids? And I want to tell you, it's okay. You can relax. Vaccines still work. They always worked. They will work. And they remain the best thing that you can do in a dangerous world to make sure that bad things don't happen to loved ones around you. I would also like to echo and maybe steal the thunder of Dr. Chin Hong by saying that it's okay for everyone to be protected against COVID. You don't have to feel like you're taking a dose from somebody else. There are plenty of doses out there. And the other bit of advice, if you like it, is that inactivity is considered a valid comorbidity for people who are seeking the COVID vaccine, and it's self-reported. So do with that what you like. Yeah. That's good enough.
Being lazy is a comorbidity.
Well, I see a bunch of people sitting in chairs, and I am also sitting on a chair. That's all I'm saying. Yeah.
Got it.
The modern world.
Thank you. Dr. Chin Hong, last word.
Last word is just picking up on what Dr. Newman just said. Don't worry about barriers. I think particularly in California, if you're in California and many other states, pharmacists are not enforcing any of this. I made an appointment for tomorrow to get my COVID shot, and I had no problems doing it. But overall, I would say that there's no new information about vaccine efficacy. It's the same thing like Bonnie said. We just are reviewing history. So all of this talk is really nothing new, and there's nothing saying vaccines are less impactful. In fact, they are continuing to be very robust. And number two, there's no new worrisome safety signals. So again, no new data, all of these things being dredged up, just tried, true, and tested. And, like somebody said, we've been through perturbations before in the intertwining between health and politics. We're holding hands and we're going to come out of this together. And we've done it in periods of crisis before. So thank you for all that you do, because you do a lot. We work all together.
We do. We do. Thank you to all our speakers today for a very informed discussion. We really appreciate you taking the time. Reporters, please join us next week when we will discuss America's New Disappeared. Have a good weekend.